Hello everyone. We're going to start this talk tonight with a quick questionnaire for you to evaluate how gamified your life is. There are no wrong answers, so try to answer honestly. Question number 1. Are you a member of one or several loyalty programs, and do you care about them? It may be a frequent flyer program, a hotel chain, or any credit or store card that allows you to collect points and get rewards. If this is the case, do you check regularly how many points you have, and do you strategize to optimize your rewards? Question number 2. Do you post on social media accounts? And after you post, do you check how many people viewed what you posted? How many likes or comments you got? Or how many followers you have? Would you like these numbers to grow? And do you take this into account when you post something? Question number 3. Do you regularly rate experiences and interactions with people? And are rated yourself by others on apps? It can be things like ride-sharing apps, delivery apps, or Airbnb. If so, do you know how many stars you have? And is it something that may influence your behavior when you use these services? Question number 4. Do you track regularly health and body indicators, like at least once a week? It can be your weight, how many calories you consume, your muscular mass, your body measurements, and you track and note them somewhere because you try to improve them by adapting your behavior, eating less, working out more. And one last question. Do you regularly track your budget or your investment portfolio, your assets? At least once a month, on paper, in an Excel file, or on an app? And do you try to optimize the figures by cutting on your expenses, by dispatching your money between different brackets that will serve different purposes, by trying to boost the return of your investments? Well, if you replied yes to any of these questions, but for many of us it is going to be several of them, it is for me, then aspects of your life are gamified. You may not play video games or card games or board games, but you have transformed some of your activities, like the management of your resources, what you eat, some of your interactions with others, your public image online, into numbers games. It is not necessarily bad, it is fun, it may help accomplish bigger things by motivating us and replacing ambitious goals that might be overwhelming with shorter-term tactics that are easier to accomplish. So I'm not going to condemn it, which would be hypocritical of me, because personally I gamify a lot of things. But one of the things I would like to discuss tonight is how this gamification affects our perception of reality, our behaviors. This will raise other questions, such as what are games exactly? What is the history of games? Why do they appeal to us psychologically? And what happens in our brains when we enjoy playing? Also, what are the differences between play and work? When seen from the outside, they can look the same. And why does the frontier between the two become blur sometimes? For example, when we are working in a so-called flow state. That gives us a lot to discuss, but everything will fall into place in due time. All you have to do for the moment is adopt a comfortable position. There's probably tension in your shoulders. You don't need it, and you may slowly release it. Also, if you want more of this channel, please consider joining my Patreon page. You decide how much you wish to contribute every month, starting from $1, £1 or €1. And on top of supporting this channel and keeping it free of sponsorships, it gives you access to all episodes with background sounds, to downloads, the possibility to vote in surveys to influence future topics, or advanced releases. There's a link in the description of this episode and in the first comment pinned under it. And now, let's begin. My starting point when I picked this topic of games and gamification was a number of observations I made over the years as a content creator. I started posting content in 2012 on YouTube, 14 years ago, and later on various other public platforms and apps. So that makes me an old content creator, I guess, but it also gave me some insight on what has happened over the years on all these sites. Things like the short-term trends, the problems that looked like huge deals at some point, but often turned out not to be that impactful. The roller coaster of formats and metrics favored by algorithms, from shorter to longer to shorter formats again. Or the rise of metrics such as the pace of posting, click rates, audience retention, the appearance of personalized algorithms, the swing from home pages and timelines filled with your subscriptions to ones filled with recommended content that you have never seen before. The rise of monetization, the way all the platforms have voluntarily worsened at some point the user's experience to make users pay for what they used to have for free. And now there's the rise of AI content and tools. So in 14 years, I cannot remember a single moment when the environment felt stable. These are things to discuss another time, maybe, but just to give you an idea about the pace of changes, when I created my first YouTube channel to post updates on the Minecraft city I was building with my little brother, things like living from independent content creation on social media and streaming platforms was not a thing yet. Actually, influencer was not a word, or not in its current meaning. You didn't give thumbs up or thumbs down to videos. You could rate them with stars, like on ride-sharing apps today. But actually most people didn't rate them, because they didn't have a YouTube or Google account. They came to YouTube casually as visitors. At the time, the subscriber count of a channel was a huge deal. With 100,000 subscribers, you were royalty. Nowadays, people still care about it, maybe as a status thing, but it matters much less to your visibility. Some old channels may have millions of subscribers, but barely get any views and income because they have become invisible. If you were around on social media in the 2010s, you experienced at least some of these things, be it on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. My point is that beyond the constant changes in the environment, what hasn't varied, and I think will not change anytime soon, is that all platforms have increasingly transformed content creation into a numbers game. YouTube understood it almost from the start. Early on, it offered people who posted videos an analytics, a tool called at the time YouTube Insight, which was introduced in 2008, when YouTube was still in its infancy. Since then, the quantity and depth of metrics available to YouTubers has only increased, and all other platforms where you are invited to post content publicly have adopted similar tools. Spotify and Apple for music and podcasts, Instagram, it's everywhere. You can know who sees you, their countries, their age group, their gender. You have detailed reports of retention by minute for every piece of content you post. You get to know how many clicks your titles and thumbnails generate, relative to how many times they showed up, how people found you, and many more things. Giving all this information may be very useful to understand what works and what doesn't. It is logical when content creators are seen as professionals or aspiring professionals. It is also an effort of transparency. But it goes well beyond that. When you open YouTube Analytics, you are also informed of how your latest video launch ranked compared to previous launches. You are given advice based on your data about strategies to make your content more attractive, better at retaining audiences, more clickable. You are advised to post better, regularly. Your successes are celebrated. There's even a little firework on your screen when your last release is the best performing of the last 10 releases. It's a game. What YouTube did, and then other platforms, was to turn the behind the scenes of content creation into a numbers game, in which you compete against yourself and others. Part of this game is made visible to the audience. People can see the subscribers counts, the view counts on videos. There is way more information that is not public, but what is public is enough for your success or lack thereof to be visible. And of course it is visible and will always be, because this only raises the stakes. It makes the game more real by giving creators clout based on the numbers. As a user, you may not think of it, but I've never heard of any dedicated content creator who doesn't care about this, because your access to an audience depends on how successful, how good you are at this game. And that's when things may start to shift a little, when you end up changing goals without even realizing it. When you start putting content out there, it can be for a variety of reasons, which I consider all legitimate. You may want to share something, knowledge or your experience. You want to try something different and creative, make it a hobby maybe. You want to socialize or build a community around whatever you have to share. Maybe you want to see if it could become a side hustle or even a full-time job, because it looks fun and vaguely glamorous. Anyway, you go into this with intentions that are subjective, probably rather complex, possibly a bit ambiguous, loaded with hope and emotions. So there is something nuanced and rich here that connects to your life and your aspirations. But then, as you enter the numbers game and start playing it, you understand how it works. Early successes, if they ever happen, may be exciting, and you want more of them. You lean into the game, trying to crack the code to get more clicks, more views, more subscribers, more comments. You identify what works and what doesn't within the game. Things that may be far removed from your initial intentions. Unless your intentions were mostly about success in visibility or financial success, because once your content is monetized, all the views and watch time turn into income, connecting even more the game with real life, it becomes serious. So in summary, you start willing to share something, work on your skills, or connect with others, and before you know it, you end up chasing clicks and subscribers. Your end, content creation, has become a mean to another end, chasing the numbers. Chasing the exact same metrics that any other content creator also chases. Philosophy, cooking, pranks, spirituality, commentary, gardening, music, painting. Whatever the substance, it all ends up summarized into a limited number of metrics, the same for everyone. And your content will compete in the same game as every other creator. By itself, this is not necessarily a terrible thing. The game is fun to many people. There is a genuine learning curve, so you learn things playing it. About the game itself, about how to make your content appealing, and about yourself. But it also has possible consequences. First, on your mood, which may become subject to fluctuations completely separated from the quality of what you make. You get an illusion of control with all these metrics, but the truth is that you have no control over the way algorithms work, and they change constantly, so you cannot crack the code indefinitely. You may have long periods of success, but inevitably your journey will be a roller coaster with more difficult periods and no guarantee to get out of them. But I would argue that this is manageable. What is more concerning to me is how, in this case, gamification flattens your creative experience. How it replaces the complexity, the subjectivity, the richness of your initial intentions, maybe their ambiguity, with numbers and metrics. Under the fun of the game, and this fun can be rather intense at times, I'm not saying it is not enjoyable, but under it, there is not much depth here. We start by crafting something that is meaningful, that invites us to go a bit more in depth in our personal growth, our emotions, our self-knowledge. And the numbers game drags us back to the surface. It invites us to live in the most superficial layers of our consciousness and our intellect. Said differently, it drains out meaning, depth, and nuance. There may be fun in it, efficiency too, but there's also avoidance, uniformization, a kind of dryness that takes us away from what life also has to offer. The vast majority of content creators become quickly aware of what is going on. They realize that the numbers game is something entirely separate from their initial intentions. It is impossible to not notice. If someone goes into content creation purely for the numbers, in which case the content is just a mean to an end, this is no big deal. But for others, the reality of being a content creator is an uncomfortable and constantly shifting balance between a game that is appealing by itself and that must be played if you want to develop an audience and get ears or eyeballs on what you do, and the making of something meaningful to them, something that may be more satisfying and fulfilling and durable than generating clicks or income. Even without all the complexity of an analytics page, I think anyone who has ever posted on social media and wished for a bit of public attention on their text, their picture, or their video, attention expressed in views or likes, can relate to that experience. However shallow and probably vain the game is, it is appealing because it is fun and it rewards us with, at the very least, a fleeting sense of validation. As far as I'm concerned, when I told you about this uncomfortable balance, I still have to remind myself regularly why I do what I do. Every time I pick a topic to talk about, or every time I make choices about how I'm going to present it, I have to ask myself whether I'm doing it because it will do something meaningful for me and others, right now and also in 1, 5, 10 years, or if it's because the numbers will be good. Ideally, I want both, but I have to make an effort to make sure the latter doesn't dominate, that the numbers game doesn't become the end, because I would find it sad. There is no judgment here on my part. I wouldn't blame anyone for trying to take advantage of the content creation game and ecosystem to make money or just chase clout, as long as they don't lie or harm or scam others. I think in life we often do what we can or what we have to do, and not everything has to be deep, meaningful, or morally impeccable. My point with this long tangent was to express how much, in my experience, gamification on content platforms also has a slightly sinister side. This term, gamification, was coined in the years 2000, and it became popular in the 2010s, first as a strategy for a variety of actors. Not just social media apps, it can be useful in education too. For example, to help students get invested and learn more easily. For a part, it is a renaming of things that existed long before. Military students played war games, or loyalty programs were a thing decades ago. But the fact that there's now a word for it tells us that it tends to become more prevalent. On top of being a strategy for certain actors, mainly businesses, it is also a phenomenon, one that touches most of us one way or another, as I was trying to show with this little questionnaire at the beginning. And this phenomenon made me wonder, could gamification also flatten life in other contexts, drain the richness of subjectivity out of them? I think to an extent it does. For example, when we rate each other or interactions on different apps. Let's say you call a ride, the car is clean and the driver is polite. This deserves 5 stars. Now, if on top of that you have the funniest or most interesting conversation with the driver, it is also worth 5 stars. You may leave a more qualitative comment to show your appreciation, a comment that no one except the driver will ever read. But the system, the numbers, failed to capture that, it's 5 stars. The game, that is the rating system built into the app, has failed to capture reality. It only records a number that is identical to any other satisfactory ride. All nuance has gone by the window. That's not a big deal, until we realize that as users, we totally judge drivers before we meet them based on their average number of stars, and they do the same with their passengers. For convenience, speed, and because we have other things to think about, we accept the rating as the assessment of the person, or at least as a forecast of the quality of the interactions we are going to have with them. We easily forget that it's a game, and that data has a hard time really capturing the complexity and nuance of real life. I always found there was something slightly sinister in the development of mutual ratings in apps. Something that started barely 20 years ago and has only become more prevalent since then. It has merits, and I know it only evaluates a quick for-money service. We rate a service, not a person. But this type of quantification of the quality of a human interaction completely strips it of its uniqueness. It standardizes reality, puts it in a box that we may end up confusing with reality itself. I think here we touch on something bigger than numbers games. The civilization we live in is one of data and technical efficiency. We quantify enormously and try to put as many things as possible in statistics. In comparison with 2 or 3 centuries ago, the quantity of data we gather about everything is impressive. GDP and how it grows, including month to month, industry by industry, life expectancy and public health indicators, education levels. Producers and consumers are constantly surveyed. The impact of many things, from public policies to ad campaigns, is measured in real time sometimes. The way people use their time, the population in general, and demographic indicators. Everything that is quantifiable is measured. And we even try to measure subjective things, such as levels of happiness, stress, or satisfaction, with a large range of indicators. Measuring reality with numbers is ingrained in our societies. And all these statistics serve to guide and justify public policies, economic decisions, corporate strategies. What we call a well-informed decision is one based on data. And don't get me wrong, it's great for a lot of things. Without the drive toward technical efficiency and measurement, we would certainly be all poorer. Humankind would not have gone to space, our lives would be shorter, less comfortable, and we would know far less in general than we do. However, there are also plenty of things that are harder to capture with data. More qualitative and subjective things that can be approached but not precisely quantified. And for what interests us tonight, games. Even the most complex of games is based on a limited number of rules and metrics. It is always just a model that evokes reality. The more complex a game is, the closer it may approach a certain vision of reality. But it is still way off, and there are limits to the complexity you can bring to a game before it loses all the fun. The richness of reality, its uniqueness, is hard to fully capture in a limited set of numbers. And this is heightened in the context of a game that has to remain enjoyable. Games need understandable mechanics. They can go quite complex, because the learning curve is part of the appeal, and complexity gives them more replay value. But there's a limit to complexity. For their own sake, games need a model that echoes reality through rules, goals, competition, while staying easily understandable and playable. Which brings us to another set of questions. What is and what is not a game? How have games evolved along history? And what is the appeal? Why do we distinguish a game from work? When seen from the outside, many games actually look like work. A game is a structured form of play. Playing is an activity observed in a lot of animal species. Spontaneously, animals play in different ways. They move alone, running or tumbling. They play with objects, items in their environment they interact with, like a bird with a stick or a dog with a ball. And they also play socially, in activities involving two or more individuals, wrestling or chasing, for example. Why do animals play instinctively, and human children too? It is believed to serve different purposes, like practice survival skills, develop brain connections, strengthen bonds within a group, or establish hierarchies. Playing tends to be more prevalent among the young, which makes sense if it is an evolutionary advantage, and something they need for their development. Animals use signals and behaviors, also instinctively, that prevent play from turning into a real fight. They reverse roles in a simulated fight. They show they mean no harm with body language, or they hold back their strength. So there are informal rules, or rather an instinctive code when they play together. But still, it is not really a game, because a game implies a challenge, a goal, and a set of rules accepted by one or several participants. That's why by game we generally imply things like sports, board or card games, video games, which are clearly distinct from unstructured play. It seems games are a universal feature of human culture. The earliest traces of games we have date back from several thousands of years, but they probably appeared before. A race from point A to point B, or wrestling with rules, are games. Among the oldest examples of board games, there is an Egyptian game called Senet, dating from at least the 3rd millennium BC. Its rules are uncertain, but it was played with pawns on a playing board with 30 squares. Another old example is the Mesopotamian rival game of Ur, named after the city of Ur, but it was popular in antiquity across the Middle East. Senet, or this game of Ur, were race games that seem to have been precursors to backgammon. The players had to be the first to complete a certain task. In East Asia, the game of Go was invented in China in the 1st millennium BC. It is not a race, but rather a conquest game between two players. The oldest known board game, could be Mancala, a game in which two players face each other to capture their opponent's pieces. Could be because Mancala boards would have been found in Neolithic dwellings from 6,000 years ago. But there is uncertainty about what these artifacts actually were. Another very old game is chess, which traces back to ancient India, around the 6th century AD. It traveled through Persia, the Islamic world, and Europe, before taking its modern form in the late Middle Ages. Another type of games that traveled are the ones based on playing cards. There were older games using tokens, but paper or cardboard playing cards are believed to have appeared in the first millennium in China. From there they spread throughout Asia and reached Egypt around the 12th or 13th centuries, before entering Europe, probably via Spain or Italy. In the 15th century, the modern deck of 4 suits that is widely known today, spades, hearts, diamonds, and clubs, was designed and started to be mass-produced in France. These 4 suits are evolutions of Mamluk suits. The Mamluks ruled over Egypt in the Middle Ages, and theirs included swords, sticks, cups, and coins that are still used in some tarot decks. The last tweaks that led to modern decks of playing cards were invented in America in the 19th century. The Joker card was added, and so were numbers in the corners of cards, so that players can fan their cards in their hand and see what they have without looking at each card individually. There are certainly many forgotten games. What we can be sure of is that playing games socially was already very widespread across all social classes in antiquity. And it remains true, maybe more than ever, because since the 20th century, a lot of tabletop games have become massive: Monopoly, Scrabble, Clue, together with role-playing games, obviously video games. Sport games are more popular than ever, from the recreation of Olympic games to all individual and team popular sports. So gaming is something very visible, even more if we take into account what we saw before. On top of these activities that are explicitly recognized as games, there are the games we play without necessarily seeing them as such. Collecting points in loyalty programs, optimizing our budgets, chasing clout on social media, and so on. So we like to play, and the most obvious reason is that it is fun. But why is it fun? And what is the difference between play and work? After all, work also has goals, a set of rules. A day of work involves rising up to a challenge. There are many aspects of games, like the repetition of certain actions, or possibly physical pain in sport games, that are reminiscent of work. And on top of that, some people actually have fun working. The boundary between work and play is defined primarily by more subjective factors: motivation, control, or a psychological mindset. We call work what is done out of necessity, of obligation, whereas play is satisfying by itself and voluntary. the stakes are also different. Work has real-world stakes, whereas play has safer stakes. Losing is not that serious. Actually, the more you take a game seriously and want to win at any cost, the less fun it tends to be, because it becomes unsafe. But the frontier of play and work can become blur. That's typically what happens when a person enters what we call a flow state at work. When we are deeply engaged in a professional task, which makes us lose track of time and stop wondering about whether what we are doing is annoying, painful, or enjoyable. We're in the flow. This flow state mirrors psychologically the play state. And that's why it is probably the least painful, least boring, and most enjoyable, and also most productive way of working. Another quick tangent, but I think that's the state we need or should try to put ourselves into when we work. And this is where distractions such as interruptions or the urge to check one's phone are really bad. Not just for productivity, but also for satisfaction, because it takes us out of the flow. And returning to gamification, as a strategy, it works because this is exactly where it is. At the boundary of work and play, it has this way of blurring the distinction, making us feel that work is voluntary and intrinsically rewarding as we collect points, badges, or accomplish subtasks or reach targets. So why is it satisfying psychologically and beyond neurologically when we play? There are different schools and approaches to psychology, but the framework that may be useful here is the one that tries to look at our psychological core needs, and games fulfill various of them. Needs like autonomy, the freedom to make choices, competence, the mastering of a skill, or in the case of multiplayer games, relatedness, the connection with others. Autonomy is the need to feel that our choices are genuinely ours. It may be an illusion sometimes, because there can be a lot of unconscious, invisible other factors than our own free will, but it is the perception that matters here. Games satisfy this need of autonomy by giving us constant opportunities to make meaningful decisions with tangible implications. Which path to take, which strategy to try, how to approach an obstacle. Of course, it doesn't work in pure luck-based games, like a slot machine. But apart from pure games of chance, games invite us constantly to make decisions that produce a sense of agency, a moment of freedom. Another core need would be competence, the need to feel effective, capable, to extract a sense of worth from it. Games can be seen as systems designed to deliver exactly that. The goals are clear, performance feedback is immediate, and progress is visible. You complete tasks, gain ground or control on a battlefield, which can be anything from a chessboard, a Monopoly board, or a metaphorical space. You level up, you beat your high score, you accumulate virtual points or money or badges. Underneath, each time, this is validation of competence. In real life, feedback is slow, it is ambiguous sometimes. But games deliver this feedback immediately and with clarity, unambiguously. So they deeply satisfy the need for competence. And finally, I mentioned relatedness, the need to feel connected to others. It's obvious in multiplayer games or community challenges, but even single-player games may contribute to bonding when people share their experience. And even watching games can generate relatedness between supporters of sport teams, for example. So when we play a game, we have one or several of these needs satisfied at the same time. And this would produce effects ranging from engagement to genuine enjoyment, without the need for any other reward. The game is the reward, or produces it. And this would be what puts us in the flow, in a state of immersion, provided the game hits a sweet spot between too easy, which would eliminate the sense of competence, and the great autonomy and relatedness, it becomes boring, and too hard, in which case it becomes just frustrating. Progress during the game, and progress over a longer period of time, playing repeatedly, the learning curve that makes us feel we get better at it, these are key to lasting enjoyment. Even though work is not designed to satisfy these core needs, contrary to games, sometimes it can. Autonomy, competence, relatedness, these are needs work may also provide for, and it will be all the more enjoyable when it does. Now, psychology doesn't exist in a vacuum. Behind it, there are thousands of years of evolution as a species, and there's also neurobiology. Games do not really create new desires, they exploit existing evolutionary adaptations. I told you about animals playing before, as part of their individual learning and growth. It helps them as individuals, but it also helps their species subsist by having representatives more apt at surviving and reproducing. Play is a training ground, and as such it is also considered by zoologists as a survival mechanism. It is tempting to believe that an instinctive drive to play has become hard-coded in mammals especially, including humans, over thousands of generations, as a result of natural selection. It's a big advantage for survival. Maybe the core needs related to the enjoyment of games I mentioned before, autonomy, competence, relatedness, exist because they are also advantages for survival. They favor the development of skills, decision-making, socialization. All of these are critical advantages, and for that reason they would have been selected over many generations, and our brains would reward us every time these needs are satisfied. Now when we say we are happy, or our brains make us happy, we touch on the relation between biochemistry and psychology, or subjective experiences. I elaborated on that in a previous episode about consciousness. There is something a bit off in saying our brains reward us, because we are our brains too. They are not a separate entity that would pilot us and be the puppet master of ourselves. They may be puppet masters of our bodies, but as beings, we are all of these things: the brain, the body, and all the immaterial things that are our consciousness, thoughts, emotions, souls for those who believe in their existence. So, what is the articulation between physical interactions and subjective experience? Why do molecules moving or electricity in our nervous system produce subjective experiences? We still don't know that. Even though neuroscience has progressed dramatically, and we know that chemistry, thoughts and sensations are connected, because this can be observed and measured, we don't understand intimately how the leap from the physical world to the subjective one operates. That's a mystery. But when it comes to sensations of satisfaction, a chemical that is at play and often mentioned is dopamine. A well-known term, which in popular culture is sometimes called the feel-good or pleasure molecule. That's a nickname that modern neuroscientists would not use, because even though there is a connection between doing something enjoyable, eating good food, winning a game, receiving a compliment, and surges of dopamine released by our brains, it doesn't really work like this. The misconception is based on early studies that closely linked dopamine and feelings of satisfaction. But modern research showed that dopamine spiked before getting a reward, not after. It seems to be more a molecule of anticipation, like the mild craving you may feel when you smell good food or see a notification. Rather than liking, dopamine controls wanting. And different chemicals, such as endorphins, handle liking, the actual physical pleasure of the moment. So dopamine would be the substance our brains use to motivate us, a motivation or anticipation molecule. One that pushes us to repeat beneficial behaviors, to take action. By the way, this is not the only known role of dopamine. It also acts as a mechanical regulator in the brain, ensuring we can coordinate movements, and it plays a role in attention, memory, and decision-making, which is why abnormally low dopamine can result in poor focus or conditions like Parkinson's disease. High, hyperactive dopamine is often associated with schizophrenia and is a primary driver of addictions, when addictive substances cause massive artificial spikes in dopamine. Returning to games, I mentioned dopamine because it is a key substance to understand what is at play. Dopamine spikes most strongly not when a reward arrives, but rather when a reward is in sight, expected, or uncertain. You probably experienced this sensation that the moment just before solving a puzzle, when things fall into place but are not fully there yet, or the moment just before opening a gift. These moments are more exciting, more engaging than the resolution itself. It is exciting but also literally engaging. For a fleeting moment, nothing else exists. That's the dopamine hit. The same dopamine hit in that split second when you see that your post online has been liked, but you haven't fully realized by how many people yet. The dopamine hit gives us the motivation to analyze the outcome, to open the mystery box, to move towards a resolution. Games with their subtasks, their strategies, their constant possibility of success, are like dopamine-inducing systems. They constantly motivate us with small carrots when we solve something short-term, plus the perspective of a bigger carrot at the end of the road, the prospect of winning. And so games may feel relaxing sometimes, but more often than not, they give us motivation and energy. The relaxing effect, like in the case of jigsaw puzzles or crosswords, for example, comes more from the repetition of many small dopamine hits at each step forward. Everyday life situations are also full of effort and outcome, but the connection in real life between effort and result is often ambiguous or invisible. We work hard on something, and the feedback is delayed, uncertain. This can be frustrating. In a game, cause and effect are usually immediate and easy to understand. There is a clarity, an order with a limited number of variables that the brain seems to find intensely satisfying. And the way we relate to satisfaction mechanisms, our tolerance to delayed gratification, our drive to relate to others, and how, those are personal things too. The same game may be appealing to different people for different reasons, and one that looks fun to someone may appear boring or tedious to another person. Now, how does dopamine work from a biochemical perspective? I told you it was a neurotransmitter, and it is also a hormone. Neurotransmitters and hormones both are chemical messengers in the body, and they both are complex molecules. So what is the difference, by the way? They use different delivery systems for different functions. First, there's a difference in distance or reach. Neurotransmitters are released by neurons, nerve cells, to travel across the microscopic distance between adjacent cells. This gap called the synapse. Hormones are secreted by glands and released into the bloodstream, meaning they travel way longer distances throughout the body to reach distant organs. Another difference is the speed and duration of action. Neurotransmitters work almost instantaneously, in milliseconds, and once they have served their purpose by transmitting a signal, they are quickly degraded or reabsorbed by the receptive cell. Hormones are slow. They take sometimes minutes, but rather hours or days to produce an effect, but with more lasting impact. So in other terms, neurotransmitters are very precisely targeted, whereas hormones have a broad and widespread impact. But some chemicals, including dopamine, act as both. There are others, such as adrenaline. The reason we care about dopamine tonight is for its function as a neurotransmitter. As a hormone, it acts as an inhibitor that suppresses the release of other hormones, or dampens inflammatory responses, helping regulate things like lactation, the functioning of kidneys, digestion, or the immune system. As a neurotransmitter, dopamine is synthesized in the nerve terminal by transforming amino acids obtained from our food, a transformation achieved by enzymes, chemical catalysts. Once synthesized, the molecules of dopamine are packaged into tiny sacs at the very end of neurons, When an electrical signal reaches the end of the nerve cell, this impulse triggers the release of dopamine into the gap between neurons. This gap, which is called the synaptic cleft. So the dopamine diffuses across the synapse, where almost instantly it will bind on the other side to specialized receptors. Again, chemical reactions of different kinds happen as soon as dopamine is captured by the receptors. And this is what makes the receiving neuron react. Once dopamine has played its role, it is quickly reabsorbed or broken down by other enzymes, which prevents overstimulation. The dopamine signaling has to be quickly terminated. This quick action is chemically very complex, with multiple types of enzymes and receptors playing their part, and that's just for one neurotransmitter among many. More than 100 unique chemical messengers have been identified in the human body. A list that is still open because more are regularly discovered, which gives a hint at the mind-boggling complexity of the human nervous system. So, it's been a long ride from YouTube to neurotransmitters, but we have finally reached the end of this episode. If you are not tired yet, you may pick another one from my library and embark on another adventure. Or you may keep your eyes shut, let yourself go, and fall asleep. I'll be back soon with another episode, and in the meantime, sleep well, sweet dreams. Au revoir.